are in the book of Matthew today. The last 2 weeks, I've actually engaged parts of what would be commonly known as part of the Christmas story, but they're really things that actually happened after the night in Bethlehem. So last week we were 40 days out with Simeon in the temple, and now we don't know quite how far out we are, but commonly these folks, the magi, the wise men, are part of today's text, and although we commonly see them in the manger and at the barn in our nativities, and it's okay that they are there, because Jesus plus nothing is everything, and so God, He can handle that. But the reality is they sometime later in a house, and they followed a star. So anyway, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the star. We're going to talk about the wise men, the magi. We're going to talk about Herod, who's all part of that story. He was the king. And of course, we're going to talk about the child, who is very much part of this story. So I'm going to read Matthew 2, 1 through 12, and then we're going to talk about it. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet," and we read that this morning, but Matthew's going to quote part of Micah here. "And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they returned to their own country by another way. This story of the wise men, if we follow it through, is full of all kinds of characters, all kinds of people within the story. But today the theme is Advent peace. And the truth is, the true reality is, I thought this was good, that this was the week before Christmas. It's the week before Christmas Eve, which is next Sunday, the week before Christmas, because it's this week that we tend to be least at rest and least feeling any peace at all, because we have all of these things that we need to do, all of these things that we need to accomplish before Christmas. And so we come and we are frazzled, and even this week, tonight, even here, we have a concert, and then next Sunday is Christmas Eve morning, and it happens to fall on a Sunday. So that means Christmas Eve morning for me, I will be here doing worship, and then Christmas Eve evening, we'll be in the park, and I have to do something there, and in the midst of it, my boy is coming home this week, and I can't wait for him to come home, and the rest of my family is going to be here, and then my daughter is leaving for Houston on Thursday, so that means before Thursday, we have to have family Christmas, and we have to do this all at one time. Peace on earth. Yeah, Jesus saves, man. He does. So we get this all together, and even, after church, there's going to be people practicing here. There's people getting to be reading here. We are busy. We aren't in this place of rest. I felt the ache of unrest this week. But one of the things, even as I began to engage that, the ache of unrest actually reflects a lack of peace. And so even this morning, as we engage this text, we actually see a man who is disturbed. He's not at peace. We see some wise men who just seem to be going on their merry way. And we see the child who is the peace. So this morning, you can go back to the first slide. I'm kind of going to walk through the characters. So we have Herod, who is disturbed. He's troubled. He is not at peace. Now, Herod is the ruler of the Jews, so he's a king, and in those days with Israel, the king and the politics, they all mixed in Israel. So Herod also, in a sense, is the representation of the people of God. He's the people of God's king. He's the king of Israel. He's the king of the Jews. Israel is under Rome's thumb at this point in time, so there's the Pilates and the Neros that are over them. But for the people of God, for the religious world, he was a ruler of the temple, and he was the king of the temple. You have Herod, and Herod was disturbed. And then you have the wise men who come from the east, coming from Jerusalem. They're scholars. They're wise people. And the two mix. Herod is disturbed. He has no peace. The wise men have seen a star, and they're following it. And the two worlds collide. Herod is troubled. And why is he troubled? Because there is a king that is coming. The wise men are scholars. They are learned. They must have studied the stars. Ironically, as these two worlds collide, what the wise men would have been involved in. So they're coming from the east. So more than likely, these wise men, they would commonly have been known as pagans. They also would have been people that would not have necessarily known of Messiah. They wouldn't have known of Yahweh and Jehovah. They actually would have been involved, even in their studies, in something that Herod and the religious folks would have found religiously detestable. I mean, they were kind of mystics who kind of gazed at the stars and took their cues from the stars. And yet something happened in the stars that was otherworldly and different. And somehow we can assume they must have had some kind of background because they tied this then to a child, to one who is coming, who is going to be the king of the Jews. But the two worlds collide. And part of the two worlds, so Herod, he is the religious king, he's the religious leader, and yet he doesn't know. I mean, he's scrambling. He calls the religious people up. Well, who is this child? What is it about? And they all gather together, and they get out the Old Testament, and they read, and lo and behold, there is a child that's going to be born, and he's going to be born in Bethlehem, of all places, as is it written in the book of Micah. So you have these wise men who actually know more than the people of God know in the text. And that's kind of Matthew's theme, which we've kind of seen throughout this year as we've been in there. It seems like everybody who gets it wrong in Matthew are those of the ones who are on the inside. They are on the inside of the kingdom, and here these foreigners come, and they know more than the king of the people of God. And they're going to follow this one who is to be the king of the Jews. I had this moment this week where I just wondered where these guys got the name, the three wise men. One, we don't know that there were three. We say three because there was gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Could have been a group of people. We don't know, but that's kind of beside the point. We still call them wise men. Well, when I read the text, they actually seem kind of clueless to me. They go to the king of the Jews. They may not know how paranoid he is, and we know he's paranoid because he kills John the Baptist. I mean, he just goes on. He's this paranoid king. And what do they tell the king of the Jews? They tell the king of the Jews that someone's just been born who's the future king of the Jews. I mean, what do they expect him to do? How would you expect a king to react to that? By the way, king, there's another king in the neighborhood. In the midst of all of that, and I actually think there is a reason for that, and so they share, and you know what, in the story of Scripture, and I mean, this story is wild, by the way. We're actually not in the rest of chapter 2. But actually, so then Herod gathers with them, and he wants to know when this star appeared. Now, at the end, we read that the wise men were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod and tell Herod where the baby was, because Herod didn't want to come worship him. He wanted to hurt him. But you can really make the case that the wise men set in motion the reality that was going to take the life of every male infant under 2 years of age in the land. It's a wild story. It's one of the reasons Herod wants to know when the star is born. Then when he gets tricked and they don't come back, he just takes that 2-year sweep and says, everybody's gone. I don't know when this child was born, but I'm going to make sure I get him. Herod, not at peace. Wise men, they seem to me to actually be at great peace. They were at so much peace. They were scholars. They were learned men. It didn't matter what Herod's reaction was. And what we begin to see with Simeon that we saw last week, and we begin to see with the wise men this week, where Jesus is involved. Where Jesus is involved, anything goes. They are at such complete peace about who this child is that there's almost this sense That it actually doesn't matter that Herod may or may not think that he has the power to kill him. He's not going to be able to do it. Listen, they're following this child. And one of the things that we see, when Jesus is born, the shepherds and the heavens open up and angels appear in the heavens and they sing glory to God. When Jesus is born, a star moves. Listen, I know we have a lot of sentimentality surrounding Christmas. And I know we really like to celebrate that moment, but when actual Advent came, when actual Jesus was born, when God showed up, heaven and earth shook. The cosmos changed. That's who we are celebrating. This is the one to whom we call our peace. And I think these scholars, in their own limited way, listen, they saw the star and they didn't know very much. I mean, there are other contrasts between them and Herod as they saw the star. They didn't know much about the star, not hardly anything at all. So they're asking the king of the Jews about what the star was. But they saw the star. They're learned and wise men, and they're coming from the east. But when they saw the star and knew the star pointed to the child, they arranged their whole life around the child. And they hardly knew anything at all. But the child changed the trajectory of their story and the trajectory of their lives. And here's Herod, who actually also maybe knows this now about the child, now that the prophecy has been read, but he's not interested. Herod is interested in his own story and his own trajectory. He's interested in himself. He's interested in the institution of the King of the Jews. He's interested in the religious institutions. And when we are interested in our name, or we are interested in our vernacular, we can be interested in our own names. The minute we become interested in Nature Coast Church's name, and that becomes the story, or I become the story, or you become the story, is the minute that we'll all want to get rid of Jesus. You see, Jesus is never neutral. There's no room for Nature Coast Church to be the story. And if Nature Coast Church becomes the story, I guarantee you Jesus leaves. Because he just gets in the way. But if Jesus is the story, then my life and your life, even if we hardly know anything at all, begins to be rearranged. Just as the Magi were. They come and they follow the star. It seems like the star might have stopped. It's interesting because you see God at work, because God actually leads them to King Herod. It seems like if the star had been where it was, they could have gone straight to Bethlehem. It doesn't seem like that happened. They heard, and then there was exceeding great joy when the star reappeared. And it took them to this place called Bethlehem. And then they were full of joy, and they were full of excitement, and they were full of the reality that they would see this king. Jesus came. And it's interesting, this story really is about Jesus. It's not necessarily about Herod. It's not necessarily about the wise men, because Jesus is the one you ultimately contrast to Herod. That Herod brings death and Jesus brings life. This child brings life. This child is our peace. We all long for peace. We all long to be at rest. At the end of the passage that Guy read in Micah, at the very end of it, I think it was the last words that were read in the Micah passage. It talks about this one who is coming, who would be born in Bethlehem. And the very last words in the Micah text were this: He will be your peace. He will be your peace. We all long for peace, even in the midst of the hustle and the bustle of the season. One of the reasons I love the wildlife park on Christmas Eve night is it's just pretty crazy there. People show up at the park. It's their festival of lights. Some people actually show up at the park to come to our worship service. Some people show up at the park because it's Christmas Eve and they want to be with their families on Christmas Eve and they want to watch the light show and they want to see the lights and everything else that's going on. They're selling popcorn and I mean it's a wild and crazy night. And so sometimes when we gather and we start to do our service and how we do it, you actually have people there that just happen to be in the park that had no idea that there was going to be a service in the park, and lo and behold, they stumble upon a service in the park. At times, that's somewhat chaotic. There's nowhere to sit. People are moving and milling around all the time. You've got some pretty cool light show stuff and music going on, and it's just all of this festive stuff. And 2 or 3 years ago, I got rained out. And, let me tell you a secret. I have been here 15 years now, and I have done the wildlife park every Christmas Eve, so this would have been 12 or 13 years at this point in time. And we don't really control it, although the weather is supposed to be nice on Sunday night, so it should be good. We don't control what happens. So if the park shuts down, it shuts down, and our service doesn't happen. We don't control that. They control whether the park is open. So it poured and poured and poured rain, and it was lightning and thundering and all of this. And at some point in time, they just called the church like at 3 or 4 and said, it's not happening tonight. So I felt like, oh, yes. A Christmas Eve where I don't have to be on or whatever. So my family was home, and we went to another local church there, and the choir was beautiful. The message was great and beautiful. Everything was really beautiful and really, really well done. But in the middle of it, I was looking at, I think Reese and Christina were sitting to me like halfway through, and we just looked at each other and said, we missed the wildlife park. Because it wasn't wild, it wasn't crazy, it was pretty proper and pretty formal. But in the midst of that, one of the reasons I love that is that's our lives. That's the world Jesus came into. That's the world Jesus came into. He came into the hustle and bustle. There were things going on all over Bethlehem. No one even knew he was born. Other than some shepherds who were gypsy shepherds in the field, no one's even paying attention. We were worried about whether people are paying attention as they buy their popcorn. Well, no one was paying attention the night Jesus was born. And I began to embrace that and really like that this is the night that people don't know what's going on. And yet in the middle of a field in a wildlife park, this message, the same message of good news, of great joy for all the people is going on. And some people are listening and some people aren't. And it's okay. It's how God was born. But here's one other thing I notice about the park. You can be buying popcorn, you can be strolling your kids through, you can be there waiting for the next light show to appear. And it can be extremely noisy and crazy. But it is a candlelight service. And every year for at least the last 4 or 5 years, dear Evie belts out, "O Holy Night." And guess what? It gets quiet. And people start searching for, "I want a candle. I want a candle. Will you give me a candle? We're running out of candles. Do we have enough candles?" So that when she's done and they sing and everyone sings, "Silent night, holy night," you don't hear anything but the voices of people singing, because everybody wants to sleep in heavenly peace. Everybody does. I love being out under the stars on Christmas Eve. And ever since that night 3 years ago, this is something my family gets to do together. And we wouldn't have it any other way. You know, every other religion wants peace. Islam says it's the religion of peace. Buddhism. You go down the list. There isn't one religion in the world today that doesn't want peace and isn't offering peace. Not one. No matter how they go about it. We could scratch our heads at maybe the way we think they go about it, but at the basis, it's what they're offering. Peace. But whether it's Islam, whether it's New Age, whether it's Buddhism, do you know what makes Christianity different? Every other religion offers peace and then gives you something to do to get it. Learn this. Do this. Unfortunately, even in Christianity in the day that Herod would have been true, but even in our day, we fall into that trap. We may be really good evangelicals, but we can also fall in the trap. I don't have peace. I don't have peace. I don't have peace in my life. And you know what we say? You know who has peace? Well, if you just obeyed Jesus, you'd have peace. Do you know what the fallacy is in that? Say that's true. Say I had a really, really good day today. I've dotted my I's and I've crossed my T's. Which I haven't. And I do really good. I feel pretty good about myself. Said hi to everybody. I remembered their name. I even remember to ask about such and such going on in such and such's life. Bill Tate back there, he complimented me and says, you just know everybody's names. That's a miracle. That's whatever. Oh, yeah, I'm a great guy. You know why that can't offer me peace, even if I was perfect today? Because what about tomorrow? I can never have peace because there's always tomorrow. There's always the next event. There's always the possibility that I could blow my obedience and lose my peace. And if there's always the possibility that I could blow my obedience and lose my peace, then I'm never at peace or rest because I'm only as good as my next hour. One of the things I forgot to say last week when we were talking about Simeon, who grabs baby Jesus at 40 days old and brings him into his chest. And it's the same principle that applies. The same principle applies. He brings Jesus into his chest, and the proximity of Jesus close to his heart and close to his breast. The very next word, the proximity of Jesus. Jesus is everything to Simeon. And when he has Jesus right next to his heart, what does he say? I don't need to breathe anymore. I can die. One of the things I meant to say last week and I didn't. We can never find comfort in this life in anything we could ever lose. Ever. Listen, this week you may have the best Christmas ever. You may have all of your family there. And you may have, and it may be the most wonderful time of the year. And it may be like a Christmas you've never had. Your kids are there. People are there that you've wanted. Everything has fallen into place. But listen, even in the midst of that, you can't find comfort in that because you literally could break up your Christmas dinner and your kids or your parents could go home and they may not be here tomorrow. If that's your comfort, you can lose it. It can't be your comfort because you have no guarantee that it will be here tomorrow. The only constant is the baby that's in the manger. He is our peace. He's the one that makes you at peace. If your peace, no matter how religiously speaking, is accomplished by anything that you do, you will never be at peace because you can blow it tomorrow. And I don't even need tomorrow to blow it. Just give me a half hour after church. He is our peace. We want peace. We want rest in the midst of our anxiety. Where is our peace? Where is our rest? Our peace and our rest is lying in a feeding trough, in a barn, in Bethlehem. Our peace will go to a cross. Read Colossians. Ephesians even says he is our peace. To hang on a cross. Our peace is finished. So you and I can rest. You see, in the midst of the hustle and the bustle of Bethlehem, in the midst of the hustle and bustle of a park on a coastal Florida town on Christmas Eve, you had the Herod, you had the wise men, and you had the child, and you had the star. But whether it was Herod, who thought he was the cat's meow, whether the wise men, whether they rested in whatever, we know nothing about the wise men, what they did, other than they worshiped and they went home. And you have the star. Do you want to know what Matthew 2, 1-12 is about? It's about the child. Because he is the Star of Bethlehem. He's the star of Christmas Eve. He is the bright and morning star. And when he shows up, found it interesting in the text, the child shows up and the heavens move. The child shows up and hearts move from the far east. And everyone who is being drawn to Jesus. He is our peace. He is your peace. He is the place of rest. To those places where we're anxious and we can't sleep at night, and I don't have a circumstance problem. I have a peace problem. And this child has come from heaven above. And he is our peace. And because of that, we can sing joy to the world. The Lord has come. Let earth receive her King.